All right, now we're going to talk about the Mongol Empire. I love talking about the Mongol Empire because it breaks the mold and the normal pattern we have for human civilizations. The Mongols were a nomadic pastoral society from Central Asia. They lived on a geographic feature called the Central Asian Steppe, which is a large, vast grassland that stretches from Eastern Europe all the way into modern-day Mongolia. In 1206 CE, a man born as Temujin united various Mongol tribes with a centralized command structure using advanced military tactics and a highly mobilized army. Whenever Temujin united all the various Mongol tribes, he became known as Chinggis Khan, which means universal ruler in Mongolian. What he did was absolutely fascinating because before this time period, all these various tribes would just kind of fight each other in petty wars. Once Chinggis united all these tribes, he made the army into a decimal system where he had units of 10, units of 100, and units of 1,000. In your small group, in your unit of 10, all 10 people had to come from different ethnic groups. So all 10 people came from different tribes. If one of the 10 deserted, the other 9 were executed. He completely eliminated all tribal problems that the steppe people had. Once all these people were unified, they were unstoppable. And there's several reasons for this. They were not agricultural people. They did not grow food. They lived on horseback and they moved from place to place. Your average Mongol had 3 horses. They had more horses than people. Whenever you're fighting in an open field like the Asian steppe, the army that's on horseback will always win. I kind of skipped over Attila the Hun, but Attila the Hun was another nomadic leader who led a large horde of horseback men to conquer parts of Europe. And this was like 1,000 years before Genghis Khan here in the Roman Empire. The difference is Attila's army was a true horde. There was no organization to it. There was no units. So Attila was able to be manipulated by the various European leaders because his army was just a giant mess. Genghis Khan's Mongol army was different. It moved with very strategic precision. The Mongols were also very good at adapting to places they were conquering. They were really good at adapting to the culture where they were conquering. For example, when they were trying to conquer China, they would capture engineers and then get the engineers to teach them how to make catapults, how to make siege weapons. Again, this is the reason why we can't classify all civilization as people who live in one place and farm. Because you cannot deny that the Mongols were a civilization. They had a social hierarchy. They were able to conquer most of the entire Eurasian continent. So when Chinggis Khan died in 1227, the Mongols already controlled northern China and Central Asia. His sons continued the conquest, and by 1279 CE, the Mongol Empire included modern-day Russia, China, and most of Asia. Let's put it this way: parts of modern-day Poland and parts of modern-day Korea, parts of modern-day Vietnam, parts of modern-day Iran, parts of modern-day Turkey. It's so incomprehensible how big this empire was. Every 10 miles or so across the roads of the empire, there would be horsemen posted that could spread messages. The Mongol Empire could run information from one side of the empire faster than any other people on the planet at the time because of the information system they had. So each guy on horseback would have to ride 10 miles really fast to pass the message along. That way there was never any fatigue and they were able to pretty much sprint the entire way. I think this map does a lot of justice for how big the Mongol Empire truly was. The map shown is not a normal map like you're used to. It's actually showing the curvature of the Earth. It's almost like looking at a picture of a globe, but you have to show the curvature of the Earth because the Mongol Empire was that big. So the Mongols of China integrated themselves into Chinese society and established a short-lived but impactful Yuan dynasty. Chinggis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, pretty much just became a Chinese emperor and integrated himself into Chinese society. In fact, the modern-day language of northern China, Mandarin is just a mixture of Mongolian and ancient Chinese. So the reason that modern Chinese people can't understand ancient Chinese is because after the Mongol takeover, the language essentially changes to a hybrid of the two. It's actually really similar to what happened to English. Because before the Norman conquest, you can't understand Old English. You can't understand it until it mixed with a French dialect. Old English sounds more like German. So Mongolia's power unified China culturally, breaking down cultural differences and establishing a modern nation state with Beijing as its capital. Before this, the Chinese capital was further south than Beijing, and Beijing is still the current capital of China today. So when the Mongols would take over territory, they would offer a peaceful settlement where the new people would just pay taxes to the Mongols. If an enemy didn't fight, it actually wasn't that bad as long as you paid the taxes. The Mongols practiced religious tolerance, mostly because they were Tangriist. In their religion, they believed that you couldn't convert to Tangriism, like you had to be a Mongol in order to be part of their religion. So there never was any religious fanaticism. In fact, some of the Mongols in different places converted to the religion of wherever they were living. Okay, the Yuan government bureaucracy was ran with Central Asians and Middle Eastern administrators. Pretty much anyone who wasn't Chinese could be a government administrator of the Yuan dynasty. The Yuan was afraid if they let Chinese nationals become part of the government, they could overthrow the government. So, for example, there's an Italian merchant who traveled to China. He was one of the first Europeans to travel to China. His name was Marco Polo. So Marco Polo traveled to China, and whenever he came back, he was in prison during a political war. And while he was in prison, he wrote a book about his time in China. And it's really funny because that book became very popular. Marco Polo wrote about things like the Chinese burning black rocks for warmth. People in Europe thought he was crazy, thought the story was just made up and funny, even though they liked reading it. But it turns out a lot of what he talked about was true. For example, burning black rocks, that was coal. The Europeans didn't even know what coal was yet. So the exclusion of the Chinese nobility from government led to many Chinese nobles becoming merchants. Unfortunately, overtaxation, made worse by the introduction of paper money, led to an economic decline. This will be a common theme with all the breakaway kingdoms of the Mongol Empire. So officially in the beginning, Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty was supposed to be in charge of all of the Mongol Empire, but as you'll see, a lot of the other siblings or cousins of Kublai broke away with their own kingdoms. All right, the Ilkhanate. The Mongol rulers of the Ilkhanate had a profound impact on the Middle East. The Mongols took power in the region by killing the last Abbasid caliph. Future caliphs would have little success claiming the authority over Dal al-Salam, meaning the ruler of all of Islam. Whenever the Ilkhanate takes over modern-day Persia and Iraq, it completely ends what was known as the Islamic Golden Age. For example, the city of Baghdad will never recover from the awful sack that happened, or the conquest of Baghdad. Pretty much whenever Genghis Khan sent his first emissary to Persia, they killed him and sent his head back. Let me tell you something. The first thing you shouldn't do if Genghis Khan sends an emissary is kill him. That's a bad idea. Some estimates have the Mongols killing over half of Persia's population after this. Again, if you submitted the Mongol rule, it wasn't that bad. If you tried to fight them back, it was awful. If you read a history book from 70 years ago, it would have called the Mongolians savage, barbaric, awful. It really is kind of misleading though, because the Mongols never got to tell their own story. All the sources we have from the Mongolians come from the people they conquered. The Mongols will develop a written language during this time period, but it wasn't very prominent. So most of the sources we have are from people who were conquered by the Mongols writing about. Also, if you want to be a Mongol expert historically, you have to be able to read or have translated sources in Chinese, Korean, Central Asian languages, Arabic, Russian, Polish. It's so hard to study this discipline of the Mongol Empire if you're an expert.